This is Rocky Linux. The download size for the whole thing is about 9.25 gigabytes. But here's the thing, only something in the region of 100 megabytes of that is actually Linux. So if only 1% of Rocky Linux is actually Linux, what the heck is the other 99%? What is this thing? And why am I shouting? Welcome back to the ProTech Show. I know what you're thinking. If Rocky Linux is only 1% Linux, then it must be 99% Rocky, right? No, it isn't, obviously. I'm just getting that in there before the comment section fills up with it. I know what you lot are like. When I said Rocky was 9.25 gigabytes, I'm talking about the full DVD download. I could have downloaded the minimal install, which is only 1.8 gigabytes. The difference is that the minimal install is more like the core operating system with only some essential software packages, and the full DVD version contains a lot of extras. As a general rule, the minimal install is a good starting point for a server, whereas the DVD is of more use if you're installing a full desktop environment. If you were thinking therefore that the extra 99% was simply a bunch of web browsers and office software, then you're partially correct, but even if we strip everything back to the core operating system, there's not as much Linux in there as you might think. In fact, Linux by itself is kind of useless. Let's take a step back. When you install an operating system, whether that be Linux, Windows, Mac or BSD, you're not just installing an operating system, you're installing a whole bunch of applications alongside it. In the Linux world, this whole big bundle is called a distribution. Rocky Linux is a distribution. The same goes for other Linuxes you may have heard of like SUSE, Red Hat, Alma, Ubuntu, Debian, Kali, Arch, Manjaro, Pop, Mint, etc, etc. There are a few of them. The operating system itself provides the basic functions of your computer, and then a whole bunch of applications get added on top to add more functionality. Think of the operating system as the interface between you and the computer. The operating system is not a single program though, it's a system made up of a lot of different components. The most important component of this system is called the kernel. It's the core program that controls everything else. Whereas you can think the operating system is the interface between you and the computer, the kernel is the interface between the hardware and the rest of the software, including the rest of the operating system. Windows is both a distribution and an operating system. The operating system is called Windows, but it includes a bunch of other applications as well. You can't consider Candy Crush a part of the operating system no matter how hard they try to get you to install it. You have a bunch of applications like maybe Chrome and Microsoft Office, then you have the Windows operating system, and at the very centre of that you have the Windows NT kernel. In the Linux world, you've got your distribution like Rocky Linux, that includes a bunch of applications like maybe Firefox and LibreOffice. Then you have the operating system, and at the very centre of that you have the Linux kernel. That is the part that is actually Linux, the kernel. If we're being pedantic, and we clearly are, then only the kernel is actually Linux. The rest is something else. And that has caused a bit of controversy over the years. The story of Linux as we know it today doesn't start with Linux, it starts with a free operating system called GNU. I mean, you could argue it starts somewhere else too, like with Unix, but we have to draw a line somewhere and I'm drawing it at GNU and calling Unix inspiration. GNU was envisaged as a completely free operating system that was a compatible alternative to Unix. GNU development was started in 1984 by Richard Stallman, a man who, despite his many significant contributions to computing, is today something of a controversial figure. I don't really want to get into that here as it will distract from the point of the video, but he has said and done some things that are, at best, massively ignorant and at worst, vile. I do think some of this has been taken out of context and maybe some is not completely true, but other bits definitely happened, and his defence seems to be that he didn't mean it or think it through because he's really weird. I mean, nobody's arguing that the guy isn't weird, just whether that's actually a valid justification. But I don't want to dwell on that because I don't want the comments in this video to devolve into a war between accusers and defenders of Richard Stallman. What is definitely a matter of historical record is that Stallman founded the Free Software Foundation to develop GNU. And develop it they did. In fact, they very nearly completed it. Nearly, but not quite. By 1990 they had assembled, with help from others, most of the components of an operating system, but were rather crucially missing a kernel. Essentially, they'd built a car, but the car had no engine. Meanwhile, in 1991, a certain person by the name of Linus, no, the other one, had written a Unix-like kernel called Linux. Essentially, he was doing the same thing but started at the other end, tackling the complicated kernel bit first and leaving all of the other programs that make up the bulk of the operating system until later on. In 1992, and according to Stallman's version of events having been influenced by the Free Software Foundation, Linus Torvalds made Linux free. Now over here you have a car called GNU that's missing a working engine, and over here you have an engine called Linux that doesn't have a car, and they're both free for anyone to use or modify. You don't have to be a genius to figure out what happened next. Massive oversimplification, there was a lot of work involved, but engine plus car equals working vehicle. The controversy is over what to call the completed car. The car is the operating system. It's mostly made of GNU, especially at this early point in its development, but without Linux it can't go anywhere. That works both ways, of course. Linux might be the core of the operating system, but take the engine out of the car and the engine's going nowhere by itself either. The fact is that most people refer to the entire car as Linux, and the Free Software Foundation aren't particularly happy about that. They have proposed the name GNU with Linux, and even said that if you just want to call it by one word, it would be fairer to call it GNU rather than Linux, given it's really GNU with a bit tacked on that happens to be called Linux. Now, I say tacked on a bit flippantly there. Let's not underestimate the importance of that bit. A lot of people have contributed a lot of work to the Linux kernel over the years. Meanwhile, GNU, which has been in development since 1984 and its herd kernel since 1990, well, it's 2021 now and GNU still doesn't have a production-ready kernel of its own. So let's not underestimate how important that Linux kernel is. But equally, let's not underestimate just how much GNU is actually woven throughout many modern Linux systems. If we turn Rocky back on, the first thing you'll see is a grub bootloader. That's GNU. Once it fires up, we land on our GNOME desktop. GNOME used to be part of GNU too. Let's say we don't want a desktop environment and we're happy with just the command line. You're probably using Bash, and guess what? That's GNU as well. The GCC compiler used to build so many applications, including the Linux kernel itself. GNU. glibc, the standard library that tons of your applications rely on. Linux. No, I'm kidding, it's GNU. So when the Free Software Foundation come along and say, hey, give us some credit and stop calling our work Linux, it's just the kernel, they have a point. If we were to take their suggestion and rename Rocky Linux to Rocky GNU with Linux, that would be a more accurate description of what I've actually installed here. It would be a more accurate description, but it's a pretty rubbish name. Let's put it another way. You could describe me as a white British adult male who records YouTube videos in his garage and likes whiskey. That would be a better description of me than simply saying Andrew, but Andrew is a much better name. GNU with Linux is a better description, but it's a pretty bad name. It is at least better than LibGNUX, which is something they also once suggested. Even just saying the name GNU is a bit awkward. And if you're wondering what it stands for, it's GNU's not Unix. Yes, the G in GNU stands for GNU. So you could also call it GNU or GNU. I don't know why people come up with these recursive acronyms. I assume they think it's funny or clever in some way, but it's just dumb if you ask me. And this is one of the biggest hurdles that the Free Software Foundation are facing with this. Not the recursive acronyms. I mean, I don't like it, but it doesn't really matter, does it? It's the fact that they're trying to force a name that nobody actually wants to say. Rocky Linux rolls off the tongue. Rocky GNU with Linux, not so much. Debian notably does refer to itself as GNU with Linux rather than just Linux, but it generally calls itself Debian because Debian GNU with Linux is still just awkward. The other, and honestly the bigger reason systems like Rocky get called Linux rather than GNU with Linux, is that it's a name that people recognise. Even a lot of people with no interest in computers recognise the name Linux as some kind of alternative operating system, even if they don't know exactly what it is. Most people have never heard of GNU. It reaches a point where if everybody knows something by a certain name, that's now its name, even if it's not technically accurate. Linux might technically be just the kernel, but call the entire distribution Linux and people know what you're talking about. Is it fair? No. I think the Free Software Foundation deserves more credit than they get for their contribution of the GNU operating system. But I can't be bothered actually saying GNU with Linux. or Linux, and then having to explain to people what I'm talking about when I could just say Linux in the first place. Even if it's unfair, is it fair to call the full system GNU with Linux? A modern Linux system can have thousands of software packages. Most of them are neither Linux nor GNU. If we want to give everyone fair credit, then where on earth do we draw the line? Rocky, GNU with Linux, with Xwindow, with RPM, with Dandified Yum, with Firefox, with GNOME, because GNOME's not part of GNU anymore, remember? Look, you'd end up with hundreds of words in the title, and that's just silly. So if you have to draw a line somewhere and you can't give credit to everyone in the title, at least make it something recognisable. Sorry, Free Software Foundation, I appreciate your contributions, but at this point it seems fair to say the masses have spoken. To use a very British analogy, if I ask you to picture the Elizabeth Tower, what comes to mind? Anything? If I ask you to picture Big Ben, you probably thought of this. It's Big Ben, a world-famous landmark and symbol of the United Kingdom. Except it's not. That's not Big Ben. That's the Elizabeth Tower. Big Ben is the name of the bell inside it, the bit that goes bong. It's not the tower, it's not the clock, it's just the bell. We know the whole tower isn't actually called Big Ben, but we don't care. Big Ben is a catchier name, and we all know what people mean when they say it. Nobody's going to look at that picture and say, that's the Elizabeth Tower with Big Ben, or that's the Elizabeth Tower with Big Ben, with striking clock, with partial Palace of Westminster, because that's not how people actually speak. Is Rocky Linux 100% Linux? No. Barely any of it is actually Linux. Will we continue to call it Linux? Yes, because Gregory Kurtzer built a distribution and decided to call it Linux, because it's a name that people actually recognise. And that's pretty much where the world is with it. Let me know in the comments what you think. Did you learn something here, or was this all old news to you? Do you think we should say GNU with Linux instead of just Linux? Or do you take the stance that whoever makes a distro gets to call it whatever they want? If you found this video interesting, then chuck a like my way and consider subscribing for the next one. If you want to check some of my back catalogue out, then YouTube has run its algorithm and stuck a couple of suggestions over here for you. That's all I've got for you today. Thanks for watching. See you next time.